in terms of KSI versus Tommy Fury, we'll start at the top. I mean, look, it's it's hard not to kind of equate when you're thinking about predictions for this fight in terms of how Jake performed against Tommy Fury, and really kind of if you're objective in this scene, you look at Jake as being the number one fighter in the sphere outside of Tommy, of course. You look at him as the number one fighter in the sphere, and then if you're looking at the rankings, you then maybe look at putting KSI a second. Now, KSI does have a different skill set, but the point is that Jake's a more accomplished boxer, and Jake was being soundly outbeaten, outworked, and but for a couple of moments and a knockdown during that fight, Tommy Fury won at a canter. So how really is KSI going to fare against someone of Tommy Fury's stature and stature as well, too, in terms of his height and his ability to muscle his opponents as well, too, in those points, which KSI has kind of been using in his favor in fights where he's got that strength through his opponents. He brutally knocked out FaZe Temper. He's got speed advantages and agility advantages, which he was able to kind of use to dazzle Pineda in this fight. But he's not as good as Jake Paul, who wasn't able to put a dent in Tommy. So are those things going to play a factor? Is he going to be able to bamboozle Tommy in any sort of way? I don't think so. I think he's unfortunately a lot more amateurish and a lot more rough around the edges than Jake Paul is. And sometimes that's to a degree might be in your favor because that level of unpredictability, is something that you maybe don't account for. But the Furies kind of do that. The Furies kind of make a thing to bring in novices who are often wild and don't know what they're doing, because then they can kind of make sure that they keep sharp and safe in those moments. So I think they've accounted for that as well too, which means that I don't really see an avenue for success for Tommy Fury. Just to touch on Dylan Dennis and Logan Paul before we bring Donagh in as well. Look, I've quite warmed to Dylan in terms of this, fight build-up and affair. And I think he's kind of very much kind of been misinterpreted, or kind of the real side of him has not really been seen. But he's brought a lot of promotion to it. But in terms of the in-ring action, look, I think Logan Paul will have his number. Dylan Dennis is too wide, too open, likes to block punches with his face. That'll ultimately be his downfall. Can he pull it off? Maybe. I don't think so.
Donagh, what do you think? What's your expert opinion?
Yes, correct, Danny. It is an expert opinion. It is that of someone who knows it so well. So great question, great phrasing. No, I think that Eamon's pretty much hit the nail on the head. I think that the consensus is Jake is the number one, KSI number two, maybe. You could argue there's other people who are better. King Kenny's pretty good. He's on the undercard. There's some other people who are very talented individuals involved in the space as well. All of them pretty much on the undercard, by the way. Anyone who's near enough the top spot, they've got involved here except for Jake. And he'll probably be there too. So, yeah, you're talking about KSI and Tommy. The only thing is I watched Tommy and Jake the other day. I watched it back for, I think, the first time since I was in Saudi. And he does get clipped a lot with these wild overhands. And that's KSI's whole MO. And I think that's probably why they wanted to do the fight, is because they saw how Jake was catching him. So I think that I think there's definitely avenues there for KSI. I think he's definitely got an opportunity to land something special. And Tommy's not good under the lights either. And this is 3 times the size of a venue as Saudi Arabia. It's his hometown. And it's his hometown, but they're all going to hate him. That's going to be a weird one for him. It's going to be all KSI fans. It's going to be all 12-year-olds, coming out of their mom's basements and all of that. It's like, that's the crowd that's going to be at this event. It's going to be, a mad kind of an audience. And I don't know how Tommy's going to handle that. 21,000 screaming people all booing him. We'll see. And he's not great under the lights, and that could be his undoing, as well as getting clipped, which he definitely did against Jake.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not an expert. I've got to say as well, Donagh, while we're here, it's lucky you're heading to superstardom, because I think you might need a slightly bigger car. You look like your head's about to go through the roof.
I know, it's terrible. Yeah, a little blast.
Is it a small car? A bit of both?
Mate, it's tiny. I'm a ginormous fucker as well. Excuse my French. I'm a ginormous guy. But also, I need to work on that. And yeah, also the car, not the greatest thing. It's my mum's old car. But it's good. It gets me from A to B.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. Yeah, I mean, from what I've seen of both guys, and I've seen most of Tommy's pro fights, I can't see much that KSI has that will trouble him. I think KSI is probably not quite as refined at this stage as Jake Paul. I think he's not as big physically either. And I think a lot of the struggles that Tommy had against Jake Paul were largely due to the pressure that he was under and the nerves that he felt. You know, he grew into the fight. He seemed to be quite nervous in the build-up and in the ring walk and so on as well. So I think once he should have settled down, he should be a lot more composed from that experience against Jake Paul. And while the crowd, as you say, will be largely against him this time around, even though he's in his hometown, I think the first fight, the big fight with Jake Paul, would have done him the world of good. The pressure's largely off him now. It might be unthinkable, I suppose, if he loses to KSI, but he's already been threatened with being disowned, abandoned in a foreign country and so on by his family. And he came through that. And I think, the thing that concerns me as well is that KSI has been fighting these people who are such a lower level to Tommy Fury. He's been blowing them out quickly. So he hasn't been getting the rounds in, which, you know, I know this is only set for, is it 6? It's going to be 8 and then it was 6. So he hasn't got to have a massive gas tank, but he hasn't really gone beyond the first or second round recently. And he's not been meeting much resistance from the quality of opposition. The likes of Joe Fournier and so on is probably the best that he's fought so far based on their record. Whereas Jake Paul, before he fought Tommy Fury, yes, he wasn't fighting legit boxers, but he was fighting combat athletes who had some experience of performing under pressure, rudimentary understanding of striking and so on. And I'm not sure how much KSI has compensated from that lack of experience in the gym, but he'll need to have. So I think it's a weaker opponent than Jake Paul for Tommy Fury. I think he'll have grown from that first fight as well. I've got to think of getting KSI out of there early. And I'll be disappointed in Tommy Fury and the look it gives to professional boxing if he doesn't manage to get him out of there in good fashion and quickly.
I thought you said you weren't an expert.
Well, you know, let's see the result. I mean, once we wake up to KSI 1.6, then I'll have to take it all back. Or worse still, KSI KO 1 or something. Can you imagine?
It's definitely it's interesting you say that. I think you say Tommy needs to get him out of there early, based on what evidence? Like who's Tommy ever finished? You know, like he's not really, like he couldn't get rid of Anthony Taylor, way smaller than KSI, way less of a puncher from what I hear. He couldn't get rid of him in the 4 rounds he had there, and really, Anthony was never in a great deal of trouble. It's not like he won any of the rounds or anything, but he wasn't, ever put down. He wasn't ever really hurt badly, and Tommy, was throwing the kitchen sink at him there. And that was obviously another big venue, another spot where, he was the first fight of the night, but in this YouTuber space, they show up early. So the whole arena was jam-packed in Cleveland for that fight. So yeah, I can't see him annihilating KSI early. I think we've got an interesting 6 rounds on our hands. Not 8 rounds though, because KSI didn't quite want that.
We shall see. Liam66 says, with Image being so critical to YouTubers' value, how fair are these fights? How likely is it there's little agreements in the contracts? I mean, there's only so much we can say. It's all supposition, isn't it? We don't want to get sued by Midgets or DAZN or anyone else. But I would like to think that the people involved, especially on the legit boxer side, have too much integrity to agree to something like that. And I also think that KSI, given his ego, and it's a well-earned ego, he succeeded in every facet of life that he's decided to enter into so far. So he's got a reason for that innate self-belief. I think he genuinely believes that he can beat Tommy Fury. Maybe even that he can genuinely believes that he can knock him out. Seeing him at the press conference, seeing interviews with him, seeing him up close, training in the gym, I might not believe that he can do it, but I think he believes he can do it. And whether that leads to his downfall or not, we'll find out. But yeah, maybe I'm just too much of a romantic to allow these notions of subterfuge and corruption in boxing. It certainly wouldn't be the first time we've seen corruption in our fair sport, but I would hope that there aren't any kind of under the table agreements, oh yeah, you can't land too many shots to the head, or you're going to carry me till this round or whatever. I know a lot of people were saying now about Mayweather McGregor, weren't they? And while I agree that once Mayweather turned it on, the fight was over pretty much, I don't think that was him carrying him necessarily as some sort of pre-fight agreement. I think it was more Mayweather enjoying himself and giving the fans, enough time to see everything he was capable of. And Mayweather is another guy with a famously huge ego, of course. Maybe the only thing that he and KSI have in common, but it is important, I think. And yeah, maybe KSI will last longer than I'm giving him credit for. We shall see.